Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by the infallible Steve Fox.
I think that's infamous.
Well, whatever you want to call you, yeah.
A legend in my own time.
Yeah, or mine.
Okay, we piled that high enough, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hi, Mark.
How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing okay. I had an original thought driving here this
No, you
morning.
didn't.
Well, I've not had too many of those in my life, but when I was driving here this morning, I thought, what a messed up world we live in. You know, because I get out of bed, I go cut a banana up in a bowl of Cheerios and go sit down and watch the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
Is this a messed up world, or what? You could do something like that and have absolutely no control over it unless you're Putin. Have absolutely no control over what's going on in the world. And when you got a bunch of liars trying to figure out what's going to happen, it makes it even doubly messed up. So that was my original thought from this morning.
Well,
And I'll probably go home and make some food and sit down and watch what else is going to happen.
If I could give advice to anybody and to everybody out there, one of the downsides to our news world is they want you to pay attention to what they have to say.
24 hours a day.
24 hours a day. And the greatest way is to have you living in fear, because then you're forced to watch. And in fact, you will look at someone and tell them they're not prudent because they're not watching. All of a sudden, you become a critic of what's real important, what's not important. But you got that information from a group of people who you wouldn't ask them for advice about anything else.
That's true.
So I would caution. We live in a dangerous world, and there is no doubt about that. But don't let the world decide what your faith and confidence is in. And we will trust in God. We will live by faith every day, and I will not let whichever news agency you want to pick determine my attitude and thoughts and behavior for the day.
That's a good idea.
If you can do that, do that. And trust me, people are going to look at you sometimes like, well, you're ridiculous, you're crazy. I can remember, and a lot of my fellow sojourners on this world remember the time when we did not have 24-hour-a-day news.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly believe, it was one of the worst things that's ever happened.
Yeah, you could listen to it for 30 minutes. You couldn't listen to it for 24 hours. I have a confession to make, not to you, but to in general. As a Christian, I thought of something this morning on the way over here that I should not have thought at all. They're interviewing Putin, and I thought, where's Lee Harvey Oswald when you really need him?
Well, you know,
his own people hate him to the nth degree.
Well, shoot, I don't know of any country now that you could go to where you could honestly get a consensus over what a majority opinion of someone who's happy with the present world that we live in. And I don't care if you live in the United States, or if you live in China, if you lived in Russia, Ukraine, wherever it may be. And part of that, again, I'm going to harp on this, part of that has to do with the fact that we all have an opinion of what life should look like, and when it doesn't look like that, then, you know, we know the answers to how to fix it.
Yeah, I think he's decided he's going to live his life in such a way that when history writes everything that happened, he'll make Stalin and Mussolini and some other guys look pretty good.
Well, I will offer another opinion to you. China and Russia and several other countries on our planet use fear as a weapon And if you wanted to change a perception of something you wanted, what would be, I mean, much like the bully who would come up to you as a young child and force you to give them their money, their whatever they wanted, and they never threw the first punch at you.
Yeah.
But they had you at fear. I honestly believe that a great deal of what we're watching is just posturing to create fear, to get something they want. It doesn't mean I don't think he doesn't have the propensity to go in there. But at the same time, he can leverage fear in a huge way. And here again, we've got people who are watching this who are allowing themselves to be used as puppets to someone else's agenda. Satan is the master at fear. And fear will cause you to do many things that you wouldn't under normal circumstances. Look what fear did to us during the pandemic as a people. We will do anything sometimes to be safe.
And we're still divided over what brings that safety. You got people who are saying,
well, when would you think the possibility that we should ever be the ones who decides what's honestly the best safety?
I think that's what our forefathers who wrote the Constitution were aiming at. I don't know if.
But I'm thinking of a higher power here.
Oh, a higher power than our government?
Oh yeah, I know.
I didn't know
It's a unique thought nowadays.
Oh, I thought you were talking about our wives again.
No. No, we definitely we have a lot of stuff going on, and we'll get to our topic here now after this, but we just definitely need to make sure that we go to Hebrews 11. Anytime I was ever nervous about what was going on, I'd go to Hebrews 11 because I always loved it. It said at the end, and they held their faith, and they didn't even see the good stuff. So
yep.
We're not going to see all the good stuff. Let's hold on to our faith. Let's trust in God.
Well, we got to be very grateful that we're not a part of that group that goes to sleep at night every night thinking, we're going to be in the middle of this tomorrow?
Yeah.
We'll be in the middle of this the next day. That's the kind of fear you're talking about that we put in the hearts of people.
Yes. And I don't ever think that you don't. I mean, I pay attention to it. I mean, I read the news. I watch. Generally, I make it a rule that I never watch more than 30 to 45 minutes a day of any news story, because they can generally get me caught up in 30 to 45 minutes. I don't need.
And they can get you riled up.
And the more I stay on it, the madder I get. So yeah, and what's the point? So I don't let them to decide to me what's important. Let me give me the information, and I'll pray into God to figure out the problem.
And isn't it amazing that that many people can be wrong about all those things, and all they had to do was come to you and me and ask us about what's going on in the world, and it'd just be like talking to the United Nations. We just take care of it.
Well, we wouldn't give them any better answers.
Probably not.
But at the same time, again, we want to feel safe and secure, and we'll almost trade everything that we own to have it.
Exactly.
So,
well,
what's our topic today?
What we decided to do for the next couple of weeks is, since we call our program Journey with Christ, I thought it'd be nice if we had an extended study on maybe things that you never saw about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe things that we just jumped over. And one of those we're going to look at this morning. But maybe people are that far ahead of me already. Maybe they've already figured that out. But I think 10 or 11, my grandma gave me my first Bible. She gave me one of those little New Testaments.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to impress
Did it have Psalms and Proverbs, or just
No,
Psalms?
it just had the New Testament. Didn't have Psalms in it.
Oh, boy, it was definitely,
Yeah.
that was a radical book.
Mm-hmm. I cut out a couple letters later on too. No, I didn't. But
You had your own Thomas
said-
Jefferson version?
she said, could you make an attempt to read this? And just to please my grandma, I tried to read the whole book of Matthew. It took me a while
Yeah.
because I was an 11-year-old trying to read the King James language. And so when I got done, I told Grandma I'd read through the whole book. And I thought I was done. She said, well, now you can read Mark. And I started to read Mark, and I'm thinking,
I've heard this
stuff
before.
So I said to her, is there the same stuff in here that I read before? And she said,
Does it just keep repeating the
well,
story?
there's 4 stories. There are 4 narratives, and there are 4 different authors. Now, later on, when I got to college, one of my professors kind of summarized that for me. Did about as good a job as Grandma did. But he said, most of us a couple weeks ago watched the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody scored a touchdown or somebody had a real good game, there would be 5, 6, 7, maybe 10, maybe 15
Who knew?
cameras on that one person who made that play. And then they show you all those different angles. So you just don't see one angle and say that's the way that happened. You see every angle that they can get. So now I know some people may disagree with this, even people in this room.
Yeah, probably.
But I thought that was a very good way for people to illustrate how we got 4 Gospels. Why do we have 4 Gospels? Why do we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Well, the main reason we have 4 authors is because they have 4 different audiences. They are writing to different people.
And from different experiences, different backgrounds, different understandings. We all have, a lot of us have similar lives, but none of us have the same life. I don't care. My brothers do not have the same life. And even when from 0 to 18, before we left the house, we had similar lives.
Yeah.
But we didn't have the same life.
And if you're twins, it'd be even more similar.
Yeah, I've got twin granddaughters, identical twin granddaughters. And they're different. They've had a similar experience, but yet they're different. And if you ask them to tell you something, it would be from 2 different perspectives.
Yeah.
That is the human condition.
So here we have 4 different people, 4 different authors who are writing to 4 different groups of people as the recipients of these 4 books. And all 4 of them have, now obviously there's going to be some overload here.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be some things that match this book with that book, and especially with John, because I think I've read maybe 70% of John is not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke.
No.
And those 3 are called, if you're ever on Jeopardy and they ask you, that group of Gospels are called the Synoptics.
Mm-hmm.
They are together. John's not in there with those other 3. John's just a totally different book because he's addressing it to a different audience.
And different issues.
And very much different issues. Let's go real fast, and if you have anything you want to say, I'll interrupt you until you don't say anything else. And like that works at the house. I'm sure that's going to work here.
Yeah. See if you can make that work.
Matthew is addressing a Jewish audience.
Mm-hmm.
So Matthew wants his audience to see Jesus was king. Remember when we studied several weeks ago all the parables of Jesus? Almost all of them started with, the kingdom of God is like this.
Mm-hmm.
The king had servants, or the king went away on a long trip.
Mm-hmm.
Those were parables that were expressing the fact that Jesus was king. Caesar was not king. The Roman soldiers were not king. The Jewish high priests were not king. There was somebody else they were supposed to be looking for. So Matthew wants them to understand that Jesus is king.
Yes. Of course, you have to, I think, throws one other caveat into that. He also tells the story from Moses comparative, right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And Moses was never king, but at the same time, he was the prophet, the leader, the chosen one by God. So for a Jew, there were several understandings that were paramount to you as far as your history. I mean, first of all, you were a descendant of Abraham. And part of the genealogy of Matthew is Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. And then he does
and
that.
Mark doesn't start with that at all.
No.
He
Mark
just misses that whole
because that wasn't his. I'm not going to say his purpose, but he was interested in something else.
priority.
He had a different priority as far as Jesus. And Mark also, though he was present at the time, he wasn't always present like the other writers. But of course, many people give Mark as writing Peter's account. Mm-hmm. Because Peter was giving Mark a lot of information from what we understand. He had inside information that even Matthew wouldn't have had, though Matthew would have seen a lot.
And see, I think some people have the idea that the gospel writers got together and Matthew said, well, you tell the story about
right.
And then Mark, you tell the story about that. That's not how it happened.
No.
They were inspired by God himself, by his Spirit, to write whatever they wrote in that book, because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John you don't have mistakes in there every once in a while like that. If you and I wrote a commentary on something that we saw, a car wreck or a plane crash or something like that, mm-hmm. the stories would have a lot of similarities, but there would also be some differences.
Absolutely.
And that's what you see in the four Gospels.
Well, and the other thing that you have that people, if I was asked to draw, if I could draw a picture of something, I might draw a picture maybe of an abstract concept, whereas someone else might do a pencil drawing, someone else might do watercolors, someone else might do something else. We're not looking for identical as far as their process. Word for word. What we're looking for is, what does the picture look like? And when we're done reading the four Gospels, we come up with a very conclusive idea of just exactly who Jesus is, if you want to take these men's word for it.
Yeah. Well, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to find, if you put that in the back of your mind, Matthew's writing about Jesus being king. Mm-hmm. You will notice over and over and over that was his topic. Matthew uses the word kingdom 53 times in his book. Mm-hmm. Now the other three, you don't have even anywhere close to that number. Mm-hmm. But Matthew, it's pretty simple to figure out. He's writing about Jesus as king. And when you read Mark, which doesn't even have the birth of Jesus, it just starts in the wilderness when John the Baptist is preaching. When you read Mark, you can find out that Mark wants everybody to know, or his audience to know, not necessarily about Jesus being king, but the opposite of that would be Jesus being a servant. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to hire somebody to be my servant at my house or at church or whatever, I'm going to find somebody who knows what it means to be a servant. I'm not going to go get somebody or go talk to a king and say, would you like to be my servant? No, not really. Would you like to just walk around and serve me all the time? No, not really. But Jesus, the king, offers himself to be a servant. And that's what Mark wants his audience to know. Mark addresses a Gentile audience because he is Gentile. Matthew, Mark. Mark and Luke are both Gentile authors. So their gospel is a little different. The angle that they use is a little different than the others.
Well, it is. But I will say this, and I told Steve this before we even got on here this morning. I have never been a fan of condensing someone's book down to one word, because I don't think you can do that. But at the same time, it sometimes helps to have words to help us find themes that might be in a book when we're looking for something. There is no question about it. Kingdom is a huge theme in the book of Matthew, but there's also a couple other themes that's in there that's not anyplace else either. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's the only one that has condensed it, or has the more broader version. Luke has a few little excerpts here and there of things. Of course, again, Matthew's telling a story from a different perspective than Luke is telling it one from. Steve is going to offer up some words here of various things of what the condensed version view of the books are. None of them are ever exactly precise. It's just a 5,000-foot overview of something.
Exactly.
You're not going to get the details of it, but if you wanted, like the book of Acts, I remember when they came out with that ABC acronyms for the book of Acts. Like chapter 1 was Ascension into Christ. Chapter 2 was beginning of the church. Chapter 3 was crippled, cured. Chapter 4 was disciples detained.
Did you have to learn all 28?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And right now, if I gave you $50, you couldn't do all.
No, I couldn't. No, I couldn't. But
it made you concentrate on something.
It did, and here's what it also did. I knew where little tidbits of information were in the book of Acts. Does crippled cured actually do a great deal of narrative thinking to tell me what chapter 3 is about?
Like Luke would go, okay, we're going to put this here because that starts with the letter that I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah. Just as much as you can't do it with a chapter, I really find that you can't do it with an entire book.
Exactly.
So there is a theme that seems to be more paramount than others in each one of these, but that's not the simplistic version. It's just an overview.
Well, speaking of simplistic versions, I learned the books of the Bible by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts and
the Romans.
Now, that's not what that was written for.
No.
That was written for me to say, I can tell you all 27 books of the Bible. I mean, in the New Testament. Or I can tell you all 39 of the Old Testament. Now, Luke didn't say, wait a minute, that acrostic's not going to work here. We've got to put this letter in there.
Well, when he even wrote the book, there wasn't chapters. So
yeah, it would have been nice if he told us who Theophilus was, too.
Yeah.
Stop for a minute and tell us who this is.
Yeah, is this just a made-up guy, or is this an actual person?
Well, that's what makes the study of the Bible interesting, because people who have doctorate degrees, or 3 or 4 doctorate degrees, can read the Bible and say, well, look there, I never saw that before.
Right.
Luke wants his audience to know, a Gentile audience, and somebody named Theophilus, who later he addresses the book of Acts to also. Luke wants his audience to know that Jesus is the Son of Man. In Luke, as you go through chapter after chapter, it's Jesus being human. It's Jesus being in the flesh. It's Jesus doing things that just normal people would do in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
He would cry. He would be angry about something. He's going to die in the flesh. So Luke wants everybody, his audience, to know that Jesus is the Son of Man. But wait a minute, John looks at something totally different. John says, yeah, he's the Son of Man, but go up a couple notches because he's the Son of God.
Well, it's not that the fact that Luke wasn't saying that Jesus wasn't.
No. It just what's the emphasis.
He was telling the story of Jesus from a humanistic, relatable perspective.
Yeah.
This God made himself a man. Can you even fathom that?
Gives you a headache.
I can't. I mean, my aspirations are always for greater. I never aspired to be lower.
Let me tell you a story about Helen Holdren. Helen was a lady, her husband was an elder at Brookwood Way where I went to church when I was growing up. And they asked me to do the invitation on Wednesday night. I was petrified. I was scared to death. And I said in the invitation that night when I offered the invitation that Jesus was 50% man and 50% God. He was half God and half man. Well, right after church was over, Mrs. Holdren took me in the classroom, and just as kind as she could do it in a Christian way, she said, I think I need to correct you about something. And I said, what? And she said, Jesus was 100% God, and he was 100% man. And she said, don't ask me to explain that to you, but that's what the Bible says about him. He was total flesh and total spirit. And he was total Son of Man, total Son of God. And every time I think about that concept, I think of Mrs. Holdren taking me aside and saying, you need to look at this again. And if she had said to me, look at this again, she would have told me to read Luke and John, because one of them talks about Jesus being the Son of Man and one of them talks about being the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
In summary, the four. Matthew says he's a king, Mark says he's a servant, Luke says he's the Son of Man, and John says he's the Son of God. If you put all four of those ideas and all four of those pictures together, you will have a composite picture of who Jesus was.
Yes. And, of course, I always like muddy in the water. Then you got Paul comes along and takes things that he understood of what they said, the moments where Paul had what no one else ever had, was he had personal time with Jesus as a spirit, as a teacher. I mean, he could tell a story that nobody else could tell.
Sure.
So
especially, like you said a little while ago, in the book of Acts is the story of Peter and the story of Paul. And when you put those two things together, you've got the church being started and growing up in the first century.
Yep.
And that mainly came from Paul.
Well, we've really gone long on our introduction. Let's get to one verse today.
We're going to do one verse today?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Well, let's do this. Let me mention the responses in Mark chapter 3 that kind of fit what we looked at in the first part. Mark chapter 3, you want to read 7 through 12?
I can do that. Jesus withdrew from his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Edema, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him, to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him.
Want to take a shot at that?
Well, Mark's setting up a scene, and honestly, for me, it has always been the people recognized something about Jesus because the crowds knew that he had a gift and of healing, which would have been the first primary reason they would have followed. I mean, and much like the world we're living in today, with today the overwhelming fear and bad news and being nervous about our present world, those folks that were living during that period of time had those same emotions, and finally somebody comes along and offers them hope,
Yes.
insight, and good news. And Mark ends the very part with this idea, even the impure spirits recognized him, which would have been followers of Satan. They recognized that he was the Son of God, and by definition, they would have been probably the only ones who could, at that point in time, completely say without a doubt, yeah, he's the Son of God. We've seen him before.
The response that, in connection with what you just said, the response that the people have is, they don't say, well, I've heard him enough.
Yeah.
What Mark says is, there was this great multitude from Galilee, and more kept showing up, and people would say, have you heard the words, have you heard this guy talk? I mean, he's absolutely, even some of the soldiers came back and said, we never heard anybody speak like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the responses is, in Mark's gospel, is this great multitude follows him. Now, I've been privileged to preach at Elkview and at Kanawha City and at Park Avenue. I have never had a time where I got out of the pulpit and started to walk back to my car, and everybody followed me because they wanted to hear me say some more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of guessing that never happened to you either.
No, but we have many times where Jesus I've heard people use this expression of where he would tell them not to say anything about the healing that he did for them.
Yeah.
And they would give it as some cryptic explanation. But in all honesty, I honestly believe that he wanted them to hear him more than to be there for him to heal them.
And the Revised Standard says, hearing all that he did.
Yeah.
So they're hearing about his actions too, not just the teaching.
Yeah, well, actually, in this narrative, they said they're pushing him because he's healed so many people from their diseases. Mm-hmm. They're there to get something for themselves, and what Jesus really, it's not that he doesn't want them to get something for themselves, but at the same time, he wants them to hear what he has to say. And oftentimes, as the human condition, what I want takes precedence over what you've got to tell me. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was one of the great things. But I think that's why Mark at the very end there says this, gives this declaration. They were there to get healed, but a testimony by an evil person said, there's another reason to be here.
Yeah.
And this man is the Son of God. He is the God. He is Son of God.
And even though Mark writes all the way through his gospel that Jesus is a servant, here's one of the exceptions. Mark knows for sure, because of what he's seen Jesus do, this guy's different. This guy's the Messiah. That every place this guy goes, there are crowds that want to hear him talk. Mm-hmm. The times I've been privileged to preach in Nicaragua in mi español malo, in my bad Spanish, a couple times at the church in Rene Polanco, when I would get done, one of the elders would come up and say, ¿Tú tienes un otro proclamación? Do you have another? They call preaching a proclamation. Mm. A preacher proclaims the Word of God. And so they would say to me, do you have another proclamation? In other words, could you preach some more? That never happened at Elkview. Not one time at Kanawha City did people come up to me and say, can't leave yet, could you preach just a little bit more? How about another 15 minutes? But Mark was saying, you know what the preaching is about? The preaching is about not only what he taught them, but what he did.
And who he is.
And once that happened, they connected hearing him teach and watching him provide miracles. They started following him, and wherever he went, there were all kinds of crowds.
Yes, and that's probably where we're going to have to end this week. But if you would read for next week, we're going to be doing several verses out of Mark chapter 3 and Mark chapter 4. So if you would like to read Mark 3 and 4 for next week, we will discuss those various ideas and looking at the man, the deity, the king, the servant. We will look at Jesus, the whole story. Not
and
just
here's your assignment for next week. Jesus says in one of his discourses that there is a parable that's more important than any other parable. Now, there aren't probably too many people in the Christian world who could even tell you what the answer to that is.
I don't even know if I can. I'd have to look it up.
But Jesus, if you read Mark 3, you'll find out which one it is. Jesus tells his audience, the group that he is preaching and teaching to, that there is one parable that's more important than all the other parables. Matter of fact, if you don't understand this one, you can't understand the rest of them.
I think I know which one it
That's
is.
just a teaser. That's for next week.
Okay. Well,
And if you don't have the answer to that, you're not allowed to come back to our class.
darn. Well, on behalf of Steve and I, we appreciate so much you tuning in this past week. We look forward to being with you again next week. And having said that,